What did we learn from our study of Leviticus? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we conclude our study of the Book of Leviticus on walking through the Bible. We have now come to the 97th and final episode in our study of Leviticus. If you have missed any episodes or would like to rewatch this series, you can find all of them at www.eastendchurch.org by searching under the media pull-down menu for the WTTB English podcast link. So having now completed our verse-by-verse study of Leviticus, it is a good time to reflect upon what we've learned. To begin with, it must be noted that many people avoid studying this book almost like the plague. And I will admit, with the exception of the story of Nadab and Abihu and perhaps a couple of other laws, I had not studied this book in much detail before. Why is that? Because the New Testament makes clear that the law of Moses is not our law today. So if it is not our law, why study it that closely? Because it has many lessons for us to learn and helps make studying the New Testament a lot easier. After Jesus died on the cross, God didn't simply wipe the books clean and create a law that was completely devoid of anything that pertained to Moses. On the contrary, as Jesus fulfilled the law of Moses, many of the physical laws that were enforced under the old law have spiritual applications today. The old law had physical priests, the new law has spiritual priests. The old law had a physical tabernacle, the new law has a spiritual tabernacle. The old law had physical sacrifices, the new law has spiritual sacrifices. Even in doing what Jesus did on the cross has some basis in the sacrifices and observances of the law of Moses. Jesus, being our Passover, is rooted in the observance of the Passover. Jesus, as high priest under the new covenant, bringing his blood before the mercy seat in heaven, is patterned after the high priest bringing the blood of the bull and the goat before the physical mercy seat in the tabernacle. Even Jesus rising from the dead as the first fruits of those that rise from the dead is made even more clear when you realize that he rose on the day of first fruits of the barley harvest. In not studying the book of Leviticus, it doesn't mean that we can't go to heaven, but it does mean that our depth of understanding of the New Testament is diminished. So instead of skipping over the book of Leviticus in our studies, we should be actually spending some time examining it and trying to find the parallels to it in the New Testament. Since we haven't studied much of the New Testament in this podcast as of yet, we will be making some of those connections when we study those books. As for Leviticus itself, the book can be divided into 5 different sections. The first section, which covers chapters 1 through 7, deals with the 5 major sacrifices that would be offered under the law of Moses. These would be the burnt offering, the grain offering, the sin offering, the trespass offering, and the peace offering. Each sacrifice had a different purpose and would involve different animals, as well as a different process for sacrificing those animals. Certain portions of the sacrifice would be given to the priest for their consumption, while the rest would be sacrificed to the Lord on the altar of burnt offering. Only the peace offering was able to be eaten of by the one bringing the sacrifice to be offered, as this was a sacrifice that showed God's communion with his people. It should be noted that in several places in this book, atonement is mentioned. However, we will find out in our study of Hebrews that the blood of bulls and goats could not remove sin. So we concluded that what God was doing here was promising the forgiveness of sins, which would be accomplished when Jesus shed his blood as an atonement for sin. God's promises are sure, and so if God promised something would happen, it was as if it already had happened, for God would not break his promise. Section 2, which covers chapters 8 through 10, deals with the priesthood. We saw the consecration ceremony of the priests, the first offerings made by them, as well as the killing of Nadab and Abihu for attempting to offer strange fire before the Lord. It was important that the priests recognize the importance of their duties, hence the reason that God dealt so harshly with Aaron's 2 sons for the disobedience. Section 3, which covered chapters 11 through 22, deals with uncleanness and its removal. Hebrew dietary laws were introduced, as there was a division between clean and unclean meats. Laws concerning the shedding of blood, leprosy, marital relations were just a sample of the topics that were discussed. Much of this section dealt with disease as well as issues that we don't often like discussing in public. However, since God discussed them publicly in a manner that was appropriate, we should feel that as Christians we can do the same. Section 4, which covered chapters 23 through 25, discussed the feasts of the Lord, the sabbatical year, and the Jubilee year. The feasts of the Lord included the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the First Fruits offering, the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. These would be yearly feasts that Israel was to observe. Every 7th year, there was to be a sabbatical year for the land in which no planting or harvesting was done. Every 50th year, there would be a Jubilee year, which carried with it the same regulations as the sabbatical year, but also would come with it added provisions that any land that was their inheritance that they sold would be returned to them, as well as any Hebrew slaves would be released. These 2 observances would show that Israel was to serve Jehovah, the true God, who is just and merciful, and therefore they need to depend on him for what they have. The 5th and final section, which covers chapters 26 and 27, was the final exhortations for following or not following God's laws, as well as regulations concerning vows. After having studied this book, it could be easy to come away with the view that Jehovah is a picky God, putting his nose even into the everyday lives of his people. Such a view would miss the entire theme of this book, though. Remember, this is a physical law. God, however, is a holy God, completely separate and completely righteous. He is not like those false gods of other nations. In order to worship him, Israel must be physically holy, separate from other nations. Such could only be achieved through obedience to God's law. Today we live under a spiritual law, so the only way man can worship God is to be spiritually holy, which can only be done by in faith obeying Jesus. This law revealed how unholy man is in relation to God, and how in need of God we truly are, a lesson that is still valuable today. With that, we conclude our study of the book of Leviticus. The Lord willing, in the next episode, we will be returning to the New Testament and begin our study of the book of Luke with an introduction to that book. We hope you'll join us for that discussion as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.